dear music lovers, welcome to this live broadcast. Today is with us a very special guest, Professor Paul Levinson, author, singer, and professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University from New York. Hi, Paul.
How you doing, Alida?
I'm well, and you? How is going? How is going the situation in New York?
Well, it's a pretty bad situation. It's slowly beginning to get better. I think the number of deaths are now around 300 a day, which is horrible. But that's better than a couple of weeks ago when it was 750 a day. And the number of people being admitted to the hospital has very sharply declined. But we're not out of the woods yet. And one of the things that's happened is all of our classes at Fordham University have gone from being in-person classes to online classes. And actually, fortunately for me, I pretty much helped invent online education with my wife Tina back in our connected education programming, which way back in the 1980s when all we had was text. I mean, there was no such thing back then as video on the internet. Once in a while, maybe you could upload, take a year and a day of photograph. So all the coursework that was done back then online was done through text. But we created and ran this organization for about 10 years. And so for me, getting back online teaching a class was like a fish jumping back in the water. It felt completely natural. And I've been having a very good time personally teaching classes online. And there are many advantages to online education. Students, in doing the class asynchronously, they log on at times that are convenient for them. They upload their videos, they answer questions, and I, as the faculty member, can do the same. It doesn't matter whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. The time zone doesn't matter, so it's all been working pretty well.
Absolutely. Technology can be very useful in this lockdown period and in quarantine also for students. You are also a musician and you just released some records, and in recent months you have performed some concerts. We know at this moment also live activity are stopped. How do you think can we start again with concerts, and if you have any idea or personal vision?
Well, first of all, let me say my first album came out in 1972. It's called Twice Upon a Rhyme. And I had a master plan back then that I would wait almost 50 years until there was a pandemic all across this planet. And at that point, I'd release my second album. And actually, that's what happened, even though it wasn't my plan. My new album, Welcome Up, Songs of Space and Time, although I recorded most of it at the end of 2018, wasn't released until February of this year, 2020. And again, I'm having a great time promoting the music. And as you mentioned, I did a virtual concert just a few weeks ago. There's a science fiction convention called Heliosphere. It's really a great convention. And it turns out that the convention literally is about a 10-minute drive from where I live. So I always loved that convention because I could practically walk there, and it's a very short drive. But of course, the convention could not take place in person. It was at the beginning of April with the whole state and the whole country locked down. And so they decided to go online, and they asked me, well, would I like to do my concert online? And again, there are many advantages, in doing a virtual concert. You don't have to travel anywhere. You don't have to worry about food because as soon as the concert is over, you can have a good dinner in your home. etc., etc. So I had a really good time.
I think we can rediscover the live concerts after the lockdown will finished. But also in the consumer society we're used to, we took many things for granted, and above all, the essential in favor of the superfluous has been lost sight of. Both Marx and Adorno subsequently analyzed the problem, but what we find today is that the middle class of Western companies no longer had the same purchasing power as before, which was used to regain social status, which was often characterized more than by having to show on social media. And many people probably haven't understood that normal will no longer, and we need to return to what we used to. What can we do to change the way we live?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the world after this pandemic subsides is not going to be the same world that it was before. And there are going to be all kinds of changes. As I was just saying, it's going to be a long while, if ever, until there are those mass rock concerts again. And even restaurants, to use an example of something that I know people in Italy love to do and people in New York love to do as well. I mean, my wife and I, we probably were eating in restaurants too often. It's so expensive. But we were eating in restaurants in the New York area maybe 3 or 4 times a week before this pandemic. So I think that we're going to see a lot more various aspects of life that we were not doing online are going to be done online. And I think that's okay. You know, we may have talked about this last time. A lot of people in the academic world are critics of the digital age. In fact, I know a professor, I'm not going to mention his name, when the shutdown first happened and all the classes had to go online, this professor said, I would rather cut off my right arm than teach a class online. And I remember thinking, what a foolish view that is. Why don't you take it easy, see if you can learn. It's not that hard how to teach online. But I think a lot of people wrongly thought that, hey, online is not real life, it's not true life. And that's partially true. You know, you can't hug somebody online. A virtual hug is not the same as a real hug.
Absolutely. Well, new technologies became the vehicle of culture and not remain relegated to the rule of showing. And I mean, on Instagram, on Facebook, we see a lot of pictures of people posting lifestyles and kind of things. We bid there a return to social culture in the sense of, I mean, valuable culture.
I think there's an enormous wealth of information online that we can find out about the people we are talking to. You know, if you think about it, if you meet somebody in person, which rarely happens anyway nowadays, you usually exchange email and so on. But, you know, there's only so much you can know about the person if it's just kept to the real world. But if you meet a person online, you know, some kind of business partner, a possible business venture, you can easily check out the person on Facebook or other places, see what the person has done, and that does make things easier.
Of course, and also in an interview we did last year about Marshall McLuhan, who had foreseen the era of the global village and also the new media as the message and a message. Today, the television is proving to have less and less power as opposed to the internet. And however, with the lack of researches of sources, people struggle to distinguish real news from fake news. What suggestion could you give us and when we're facing on the internet the news?
Well, one of the problems is that a lot of people don't realize is technology is neither perfect nor is it terrible. It's a two-edged sword. And so whether you're talking about the internet, whether you're talking about something like a simple item like a knife, You can use a knife to cut food. That's good. You can use the knife to cut people, which if somebody is trying to stab somebody else, that's very bad. On the other hand, if a surgeon is using a knife to cut people, that's probably good. Surgery to help somebody. So the question is, what can we do to limit the damage of this fake news, of this misinformation, which in the case of the COVID-19 epidemic can literally be a matter of life and death. So first of all, what I think should not be done is the government should not try to come in and regulate the internet. Well, in general, it's always good for communication to be free of government control. That's why we have a First Amendment here in the United States. And frankly, with someone like Donald Trump as president, who every day bashes the media and lies all the time. So let's say just, for example, again, using the coronavirus epidemic as an example, yesterday, Dr. Fauci, who here in the United States is one of our best researchers and medical administrators, he's been doing work that goes back to the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, and he announced that there could be an antiviral medication which could reduce some of the worst symptoms of this COVID-19 attack. So as soon as I heard that, actually I tend to believe Dr. Fauci, but you know what I did? I just checked in a lot of different places online, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CBS News, NBC News, I looked on Twitter, and I saw that every single place that I looked, they were saying, yes, what Dr. Fauci is saying makes sense. So I believe that that was a true report. And conversely, when Trump, again, started jabbering, I didn't believe it for a second anyway. A few weeks ago, forget about internalizing, taking a disinfectant, drinking it or injecting it. He was also babbling about getting sunlight inside the body. I knew that was crazy. But, sunlight is good in general. Sunlight kills viruses. So I thought I would check that out just to make sure that maybe I didn't understand Trump correctly. Well, he was still wrong. There's no way of getting sunlight, ultraviolet light inside the body. But I was, in a matter of seconds, able to see 5 or 6 different medical analyses online which explained, yeah, sunlight is good. Sunlight kills the virus. It's good to get sunlight because it does, by the way, when you get sunlight on the skin, that does produce vitamin D. You have to do it in a way that you don't get sunburned, all that stuff. But that what Trump was saying was complete nonsense. And so again, we now have this powerful tool, really for the first time in human history. 100 years ago, if somebody lied in public, how would you be able to check that? But now, for the first time in our history as a species on this planet, we have the instant ability to fact check anything that we might hear. And I think that's what people need to be encouraged to do. Don't believe the first report of anything.
Absolutely. Well, we'll check, of course, news from the source, and we try to keep our eyes open. The fact that we can no longer move as before will lead to a different contact between people. And for this reason, I'm reminded about a book, The Naked Sun, in a character especially, Gladia del Mare, that to communicate with the few inhabitants of the planet Solaria, or gifted of hundreds of robot servants, communicate only by holographical call. Do you think we can lose in the sense of a physical contact, and what could cause this lack of contact if has persisted over time?
Well, first of all, that's one of my favorite novels. Isaac Asimov is my favorite science fiction author. He wrote the Foundation trilogy, which was later expanded in the 1980s into a series of, 8 or 9 books. And he also wrote a robot trilogy, which also was later expanded. And The Naked Sun is the second novel in that robot trilogy. The first is The Caves of Steel. In that future world that Asimov wrote about, people lived very sheltered lives. They didn't have much physical contact at all. They relied on robots. And I do think that, this is one of the great values of science fiction. Now, what I do think is different between our world now and the worlds that Isaac Asimov was describing is the people in Isaac Asimov's world, in that future world in which The Naked Sun takes place. We're not doing that because there was some kind of pandemic which there was any hope of reducing or eliminating. They were doing it because the culture had evolved that way for a variety of reasons. And I think in our situation here on planet Earth right now, in the year 2020, we are, I think, headed towards a world in which we're not going to forget about the pandemic, in which, as I was saying before, things will be different in many ways. There'll be a new normal. But I don't think we will have anything like the almost paranoid attitude that the people in The Naked Sun had about interacting physically with other people. We're not anywhere near that situation. Not to mention the fact that we had nothing like those robots back then, where, our Daniel Oliver, the lead robot in Asimov's story, is probably 1,000 times more intelligent than the smartest AI that we have now. And that in itself, I think, is another fascinating issue. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to invent robots or even AI and computers that have anything like human intelligence. Isaac Asimov's vision still remains science fiction for the most part, even though that locked in place is indeed something that is all too familiar to us today.
So, Paul, what positive lesson can we draw from the pandemic?
So I think that one of the ways that the pandemic has taught us something, one of the things that we've learned from the pandemic is we are vulnerable. We human beings, we're not robots. We can get sick. We're living beings, and like all living beings on this planet, we're very vulnerable. I mean, look, it's a frightening thing to say, but, we're not that far away from death, right? None of us are. You could have a heart attack. You could be hit by a car. You go to sleep every night. You get a good night's sleep. There's a chance you're not going to wake up. So most people realize that intellectually, but they don't think about that. But I think the virus has made everyone think about that. And maybe it's a good thing that we're reminded a little more about our vulnerability.
Thank you very much, Paul, for these illuminating conversations about a very actual theme as, of course, the COVID-19 and, of course, culture and everything. We will follow you on social media. You have a wonderful blog and we're always in touch with your work and your music, of course. Thank you very much, Paul, and see you soon.
Thank you. Good luck and take care.
Thank you.